Well, good morning, everyone. What is it, November the 18th, 2022, Friday morning, 8 o'clock, and it's time for Women in Leadership. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for getting up early and coming to the Women in Leadership Signature Series provided by TurkNet Leadership Group. I'm Ann Quiello. I'm your usual host of the Women in Leadership programming. And you'll see on our screen, we also have our featured guest today, Polina Zlatev, and we'll get to a more formal introduction of Polina in just a moment. And then Patricia Thompson, who I'll also introduce in just a moment. And she is going to be this morning's facilitator of the fireside chat with Polina. And this morning's subject is growing an organization's culture, the ultimate competitive advantage. And I can't think of a better person to facilitate this morning's dialogue around culture than Dr. Patricia Thompson. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Dr. Patricia Thompson, who we know as Patricia, who's a corporate psychologist. So she has quite a bit of background in culture and in this subject. She's also a senior consultant and an executive coach at TurkNet Leadership Group. So she's a colleague of mine. And she's also an author. In fact, I have her book right here because I keep it. I know you're not going to believe this, but I do keep this right by you can see it's all dog-eared. I use it a lot. It's called The Consummate Leader, a holistic guide to inspiring growth in others and in yourself. It's very practical and it's filled with useful strategies for growing and developing as leaders. So again, I can't think of a better person than Patricia to facilitate this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Patricia, so you can introduce our guest this morning.
Thank you, Anne. And I am really excited to be able to introduce Polina. We've had some discussions ahead of today's session, and I'm really thinking that it's going to be a valuable session that everyone is going to be able to learn a lot from. And so Polina is the VP of Talent, Learning, and Culture for Emory Healthcare, and she was appointed to her role in 2021, so at the height of the pandemic. Before Emory Healthcare, Polina was the VP of Global Talent Management, Learning, and Organization Effectiveness at Novellus, where she spent almost 10 years of her career in a variety of progressive HR leadership roles. And she has a really impactful story to tell about an impressive business turnaround journey she supported the Novellus executive leaders with by changing the company's culture and uncovering its purpose. And culture change is a huge undertaking, and so we plan to learn more about how she did it in our discussion today. Polina has worked in HR since 2005 with roles at Rock 10 Company, which is currently WestRock, Flagstar Bank, and Best Buy. And she has a global background and speaks 5 languages, including Japanese, Bulgarian, and Russian. And so that really enables her to shape a more inclusive workplace where understanding and respect are valued. And so Emory Healthcare, where Polina is at now, is a growing network of 11 hospital locations and more than 250 provider locations throughout Atlanta. And the news reported throughout 2021 about the toll that COVID-19 took on healthcare staffing. And so we're really fortunate to be able to hear from someone who's in the midst of a massive aftermath disruption that overwhelmed the healthcare system and really placed new stresses on retaining healthcare talent. And then add to this the fast-paced growth of Emory Healthcare and how to build on its strong culture. So welcome, Polina. We're really happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, TurkNet Leadership Group, for the opportunity. So excited about the topic. It is going to be an interesting, insightful discussion. I can already see in the chat as well that I'm in the company of many thought leaders that value culture, and glad to be here on the topic this morning.
Yeah, well, thanks again. So before we get started into the meat of our discussion about culture, we just wanted to learn a little bit about you on a personal basis. And so we're going to start with some rapid fire questions. So are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So first of all, what's your favorite country outside of the US?
Oh, well, it has to be Japan. And I admire the culture, the harmony, a lot of the thoughtfulness that has gone into the language, having spent time to learn the language as well. So I've had an opportunity to see it in spring blossoms, the cherry blossoms time. And probably that's what defined it as a favorite place I would love to go back to.
Oh, that sounds really beautiful. Okay, next question. What is your best stress reliever?
There's a few, I have to say, but one of my favorite ones is just spending time outside in nature always gives me the peace of mind that I'm looking for. And riding my bike is probably one of my favorite activities, if I can get a chance to do that.
Yeah, I love nature too. There's all kinds of research about the positive effects it has on stress. So it sounds like that's a good one for you. What did you want to be when you grew up?
So interestingly enough, especially in this chapter of my career, I always thought I would be a doctor, and specifically a pediatrician, that I would be helping people heal and have affinity for helping children and people behind us to do better.
Oh.
So finding myself in healthcare, maybe in a way, is fulfilling that childhood dream. I don't know.
Yeah, healthcare and helping people. That's great. What book left the greatest impact on you?
So earlier in my career, I was really influenced by Marshall Goldsmith. What got you here won't get you there. I think many of us have probably read it, inspired by it, and shaped our leadership style. Now, most recently, I was very excited when he co-authored How Women Rise with Sally Helgensen. And this is kind of almost like a sequence to What Got You Here Won't Get You There, but for us women and the habits that we have that hold us back. So this has been very impactful, influential. Highly recommend to everyone in our audience as well to check it out and help each other out get over these habits.
I'll have to check that out. Could you repeat the title just one more time?
Yes,
in case
it is How Women Rise. And it came out in 2018 by Marshall Goldsmith, and he co-authored that with Sally Helgensen. And she has done her whole career in executive coaching, but specifically women. So it is very insightful. And I personally, going through these 12 habits that hold us back, I could easily recognize being true for most of them. So it's such a great tool to keep challenging ourselves to do better and to help the organizations we serve in a better way.
Great. Last question. What is your hidden talent?
My hidden talent. So ever since I was 12 years old, I loved cutting people's hair. Like I would love to give someone a haircut, and including my toys earlier on, probably, right? But that has sustained, and I have two boys who don't mind that I'm giving them haircuts every so often. And this is probably my hidden talent. Just love the creative part of it and just making people look and feel better.
Yeah, that's an amazing talent. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for letting us learn a little bit more about you. And now let's learn more about your professional career. And the first thing, I think it's really impressive that you speak multiple languages, and I think very challenging languages, especially to those of us in the West. I actually, a few months ago, tried to learn Japanese on Duolingo and abandoned it because it was so complicated. So I'm personally very impressed by that. But, what can you tell us about your background that led to your multilingualism and how it shaped who you are today?
Well, probably part of it is growing up in a small country in Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, and then on that, even a kind of a small town in Bulgaria. So just by definition of that background, language, and especially English or any other language that you would learn, gives you that opportunity to information, to see the bigger world and what else is out there. I always knew there was so much outside of the environment that maybe I grew up in. So curiosity is probably the short answer, Patricia. I always was very curious to learn more, to see more, to experience more. And when you grow up with a mother tongue that not everything is available, right, in that language, by definition, many people, of course, would default into English at least. And in my case, German in high school was my second language. But Japanese was truly a story of just a high level of curiosity and admiring the culture and just wanting to understand how people think and how they express that in their language. So that has been probably the driver of diving into those. And when I'm learning a language, I also don't think of it, wow, how difficult those characters are and, you know, the way you write them. And I'm always thinking of it, wow, look at how they think of this word, because these were the elements they build into it. So to me, it's that discovery that probably defines the interest in learning those languages.
Yeah. How do you find that being able to speak all those languages and, you know, your background that led to that, how has that shaped who you are today? Or how does that influence how you approach things?
In so many ways, it has really kind of came to be the way I work, the way I step into problems, into things I don't understand, even into a whole new industry in a very challenging time. I don't define it as, you know, something that's very difficult or necessarily for me to have to understand in what I already know. I always approach it from a place of curiosity. It's like, oh, I've never occurred that. Let me learn more. Let me reflect more. And that's kind of that excitement also when I do learn something new, that even if this is that I was wrong or my previous assumption was wrong, I get excited to get the opportunity to do it better or to do it differently. So maybe not knowing when I was earlier in my kind of teenage years and learning those languages, not knowing that I've probably trained myself to be very open and to stay curious about learning things that are not my language and my culture, that is now helping me in many ways.
Okay. And you said you started off in Bulgaria. That's where you grew up. So how did you get from Bulgaria to over here?
Well, I was in college and I saw this opportunity to come and volunteer in a Girl Scouts camp in Iowa. I didn't know it was going to be in Iowa, actually. It's like, oh, how cool would that be? Right? I'm already a major in English and that would be a native speaking country. I would love to go do that and help children during their summer break and be a counselor at their camp. So I signed up and I came and I spent the summer in Iowa in 2000. And then I kind of, I loved it. And before I went back home to finish my my degree, I had an opportunity to meet with program recruiters here in the US that were looking for talent right out of college. It was a program for 12 months. And so I met with them and kind of went back home with an offer to come back in the US in 2001. And that's essentially how I came back and started working in the US. So it's a very unique experience of having grown up and gotten my undergrad education in a country that I never really had a full-time job, not even for a day, as things worked out to where I started that here in the US.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. And so how did you end up then choosing HR as a profession?
Right. And many people have asked me, Polina, did you just choose? Did you always know this is what you want to do? Or did you kind of fall into HR, which happens to many of us in HR, actually, we kind of fall into it. And maybe for me, it was both, kind of thinking of how I've always been looking for things to help others, to contribute in some way to somebody else's experience. I don't know that I had defined that's what human resources does, but when I was in the US and kind of finished that initial program, I did go to take my MBA and get my graduate degree here in the US. So right after that program, I was able to work at Best Buy in a kind of leadership development 2-year program that gets you through all kinds of the business. You get to experience multiple facets of supply chain and, you know, behind the scenes and with the customer service and with the sales. And then HR and talent was one of those. So that's when I truly uncovered this to be my passion. It's like, oh, I love this work and I want to learn more and to stay in this space longer. So probably both was always there, but not defined as such. So kind of almost fell into it as well.
Yeah, and what was it about HR that you felt passionate about?
Well, my initial work was around hiring, like recruitment, talent acquisition. So I was very excited when I get to be the link of connecting someone with a job they want or work they like to do, or when I get to talk to them and understand them better, I was like, oh, you know what, this role would be perfect for you. And I kind of help guide them to what they would find fulfillment and would find ease in doing the role. So this probably is what attracted me, of being able to use my insights into helping others land in a good place. So I stepped into the field through talent acquisition initially, and I did that for probably the first maybe 3-4 years of my career.
Okay, so I guess that helping side of you definitely seems to have shown through in that initial draw to HR. That's really interesting. And then, we learned from Lynn Turknet, our co-founder, that you have a really impressive story to tell us about Novellus, where you worked as an HR executive before you were at Emory Healthcare. And so what was it about Novellus, and it's an industrial aluminum company for those who don't know, what was it about Novellus and its culture that initially needed addressing?
Well, it is quite a few elements, but I have to say they were shaped by the most senior, the CEO of the company at the time. So we, Novellus had kind of grown to be a fairly siloed place, and this was back in, I'm speaking about 2011, 12 maybe. So very siloed, very driven by people's agendas and maybe some projects that they were looking to shine with, but there wasn't this uniting common goal of what's right for the business and what is the culture that it would take for us to achieve that. So as a result, the business really struggled. We had a parent company that had invested heavily, and we were not returning on those investments at all. Financially, it was just a dramatic shift from what the expectations had been. So our parent company at the time made a change at the executive level, and that's when Steve Fisher, who is even now the CEO of Novellus, and I admire him for his leadership tremendously, and I feel so privileged to have been a partner and help shape what his vision was. And the interesting part is that he came through the ranks of finance. He was the CFO of the company. So, you wouldn't think naturally, or that goes against the biases that we have, that it's the finance people who value culture, and he would bring that as the number one priority. But Steve knew very well early on that if we are to achieve different types of business results, we have to have a different culture than what we had at the time. And he was right. There were very many naysayers and people who doubted that. Didn't seem to make sense, especially in an engineering company where it has to make sense. It has to add up on the Excel file, and it has to be tangible. Convincing those executives and really strong type A leaders that it's not about all the efficiencies that we're getting through the Lean and Six Sigma processes. It's not about the next equipment, the next technology. All of these things are very important, but unless we get the right culture in place, we'll stay in this kind of bleeding, situation of cash and assets that is not getting us where we need to be. So interesting of the opening question of how would you define culture? If you ask Steve Fisher, our CEO of Novellus, he would say, well, this is very easy. You define culture by the results you have. If you have the business results you want, then you have the right culture in place. And if there's anything else that you wish to achieve and you don't yet, maybe you should look at your culture and what is holding you back. So that's how he defined culture for everybody. It wasn't about feel good and be friends, and all of these are great elements that fall in place. But for him, the biggest driver was, let's come together to a common goal and show up in a way that we can commit to each other to be productive for that common goal, and then achieve the results we want. So fast forward, I keep telling people this would be a business case story that I'm sure for years to come, maybe people would study and would see how were we able with the same amount of assets, with the same amount of people, with just about this roughly kind of similar technology to double and triple and continue climbing up on business performance. Just before COVID, acquiring this next competitor in the industry with flying colors when the rest of the industry was continuing to struggle. And if you ask what was that key, was the culture transformation for Novelis, and very proud to have been part of that story.
Yeah, I love that definition of culture. I think particularly for the audience of engineers, and making it less touchy-feely and more about the outcomes, I would think would have been much more compelling to them than maybe some of the definitions that we were providing initially. And it sounds like it's been a really impressive turnaround. You know, how did you and your team really execute that turnaround of culture?
So it was extremely helpful. I cannot underestimate the power that Steve's passion brought to the table, and the fact that every time he spoke about a business update, every chance he got to speak to town halls, culture was inevitably, even today, I promise you, you would hear him talk about culture. So that was a huge enabler as an HR team to really then help and pull from that energy to do the things that we know we have to do from an integration standpoint. And it really, the very first step was inviting the organization in a structured way to look in the mirror and to say, can we be vulnerable and really admit the things that are holding us back? We have built silos. We don't share. One region competes against the next region on business results. We're not, sharing the same common sense that it doesn't matter if I get credit for the revenue or Asia gets credit for the revenue. Can we ship the aluminum when this customer needs that? And then at the end of the day, this is what is best for Novelis and our customers. So this process of inviting the top leadership to really look in the mirror and speak very openly. It was almost like a therapy session from an organizational standpoint, and something they've never done before. And it shaped the initial cultural belief that, was one way of defining culture, of say anything, allowing people the psychological safety to say what they think, to challenge the things that are holding us back. And that's how it started with shaping things to where we defined those behaviors that we want to show up with, but we weren't, and then holding each other accountable to them. So from an HR standpoint, then that made it very easy to bring these behaviors, which at the time were own it, have the ownership to see things through, do it right, say anything, just, win together was a big one. Again, we were very siloed and everybody was pulling for their own shine and their own success, but not as an overall team. So these things was very easy for us then as a team to bring into our interview process. So when we hire people, we would build interview guides around these behaviors. Then it was very intuitive, obviously, to bring that to the performance management process of when we talk about the how, how do we live these behaviors? We would hear from our employees in the employee surveys, does your manager live those behaviors? We would ask them every quarter. And that was powerful. When I would step in talent reviews and we look at our executive talent, do they live the culture? Do they live these behaviors? And you might be the smartest, the most intelligent and contributing technical mind in the room, and you didn't live up to ownership and win together and say anything, then you are not invested in further to move forward and to be the leader in the organization until you work through these things. So it was so powerful and so simple, but gave you a way to integrate everything that the employees experience, to see the same language and the same behavior, and to be able to tell us if their managers actually live up to that, and to send us that feedback so we can work with these leaders and help them get over and find a better way to lead.
Wow, that's super impressive. I mean, you're able to distill it down, although I'm sure it was much harder than, it sounding, just having you talk through it. I'm curious, initially, particularly for a culture where people were not used to saying anything, how did you create the sort of environment where they felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to talk and know that it wouldn't be held against them?
It really started with that passion from Steve as a CEO. He is very authentic, and you can tell even when he speaks about this that he's very down to earth, very authentic, very connecting. People see through that. So the voice and the face of that culture messenger is super important. And when initially we invited people to say, hey, let's look at the mirror. What is holding us back? What are these dysfunctional things we do with each other when we work? That's why we have the business results we have. He kept connecting that to the business results we have. And then a brave soul maybe would say something that everybody was like, yeah, that's exactly it. And then when you see the encouragement in the rooms, like, I agree with what she just said that, right? And so then people start to follow suit and you see more voices who are coming through. And it truly was an experience. You can't tell them, be safe, I want your feedback. That doesn't translate into an experience. But what we did is we created this almost like session, I would say, but it was more than a day session. It was truly an experience of actually doing that, inviting the voices and staying with that, demonstrating that until people truly stepped into it the first time and felt that was safe. Nothing happened to them. They were applauded and agreed with. And then more people added to that narrative so we can distill these cultural beliefs that we need to now show up in this different way. Very powerful. And it was very powerful of how inclusive the work was, because the consultants that initially helped us think through this, they were saying, Steve, get your top 50 people. And that's how we do it. And trust us. And he would refuse to do this. He was like, no, my top people are 150 because I want every plant manager from across the world, every regional president from across the world, every head of HR, and so on. So that comes up to my team is 150. So we challenged the model, and they had to do this with us for the very first time at that scale. And it worked. It was amazing because people felt included and they felt part of it. So then they changed the model for the record. They said, you know what? It can be done with more than 50 people. You should include all the top leaders that would influence the change moving forward. So this was also something that this experience gave to probably the industry and many other companies that were going through the same process.
Wow. I mean, that sounds, the fact that you were able to shape that, I think, is really indicative of how powerful it was. We know that culture change is one of the toughest organizational changes that there is. So, what lessons did you learn in going through this process and in helping to drive it?
I always reflect on experiences and things that go well and don't go well. I was like, what did I learn and what would I do differently? So thank you for that question, Patricia. I think I certainly learned what all the books tell you. Leadership is very important. You want to have your executives authentically, not only believing it, but feeling like it is important and consistently messaging that importance every time we have an opportunity to speak to our employees. So number one, important, not a surprise, but a strong validation of how truly it is. And then what I would probably do differently, and maybe a lesson learned of what is it, Polina, that didn't quite work? If you were to do it again, what would you do differently? I have to say that while we were able to, capture the minds and the hearts of the leadership, and maybe we were very successful in the first maybe couple of years getting up to the top to middle layer of the organization. What was still very challenging to overcome is all the way down to the shop floor where the work was happening every day. And then so we ended up introducing this model of culture champions. So a lot of HR facilitation kind of took a back seat, and we ended up training our operators and our purchasing analysts and financial analysts and directors of procurement and people all the way across the organization, union workers, believe it or not. We had culture champions that we nominated from the unions we had in some plants. And we would, my team personally, and I would host quarterly culture champions sessions and summits. And essentially the job became, as an HR, don't be the person that they always see, be the person that shapes the vast network of culture champions that they can recognize and identify with. So then we were relying on these team of culture champions across the organization to truly speak that, show that, be their role model, recognized for these cultural beliefs when they saw them on the shop floor every day in their native languages across the world. So this became so powerful. If I were to do this again, I would bring that model early on, maybe immediately after the senior executive leadership. I would recruit my team of culture champions. And also, we didn't know how many do we need. Do you need 20, 50, right? And we ended up learning that about one culture champion per 100 employees. So if I have a plant of 300 people, I have to have at least 3 culture champions, like strong, being the face of that, speaking it, living that on the site. So that was another thing I learned. It wasn't in any of the books, but we kind of, by the experience we had, that ended up being our ratio of 1 culture champion for 100 employees.
Wow. I mean, that's interesting that you were able to define that, but it's also interesting that one person could really influence 100 people. I mean, that's really impressive. And was it, systematically that they were working to do it, or was it just like kind of through the nature of work that they were championing the culture?
It was both, Patricia. We gave them structure. If we gave them structure and tools such as recognize for these behaviors, here's how you recognize. We gave them little cards, or tell stories. Storytelling was huge. We taught them how to do storytelling. So when they have huddles and meetings, hey, tell a story about somebody who lived the culture that we're shaping this morning in your huddle, and it takes 60 seconds. So we did give them some tools and some guidance of what it would look like, and they stepped in and they did it. But they had all the examples, all the living behaviors around them that they were able to amplify and bring to light and tell the story and give the recognition, so that we can be moving forward and making this live on the shop floor as well.
And like I said, it is a tough organizational change to try to implement. How long did that whole process take? I mean, I don't know that you can say that there's an end to your culture change. It's always evolving, but give us a sense of the time frame.
There's no end. That's right. It's a journey, right? Because you would always be on that journey. I'm sure Novelis is on that journey right now. And that's probably the one part I still miss, even when I was ready to leave, and I was like, can I still come and volunteer and do this work with you guys, because I loved it so much. You don't have to pay me. It was just so uplifting. But I would say maybe from the minute we launched and we reframed it and we defined our cultural beliefs, it took about a couple of years to start really seeing the evidence of now things are moving, happening. We're integrating with interview guides, with how we think of talent, how we develop talent. So it took a good couple of years to just integrate throughout the systems, make it consistent, and start seeing the evidence of that's truly how we show up, and this is really how it feels now. It took about 18 months to a couple of years, and from that point, it was more integrating even further, integrating on the shop floor, getting more culture champions to join. We did a big acquisition of a big competitor, right, as COVID hit, integrating that company through that culture in the same model. Culture champions, we recruited from them and kind of pulled them in to be part of it. So it has been, I would say, the early signs. You have to be patient, at least 18 months to 2 years, and then it gets better down the road.
Okay. Well, there are a lot more questions that I could ask you about that. Maybe people will ask it during our question and answer segment, but I do want to make sure that we talk about what you're doing now. Okay. And so you moved from Novelis, a manufacturer, to the healthcare industry. So that's like quite the shift. What would your advice be to anyone considering changing industry sectors?
So my biggest advice would be very open and very almost like ready. The things that may have worked for you very successfully in the environment you're coming from may not work at all, really, in the new environment. So I know we kind of hear that, we read that in career guides, and it's not news, right? But it is so tangible for me, and probably the first time I truly experienced it in a strong way of just don't assume that things that worked for you and made you successful and got you the results that you're looking for, you can just copy paste them in this new environment. And it is so tempting, because many times I look at it and like, yes, this is exactly the same problem, or it is the same challenge. And it's almost like you know the answer and you want to go tell people exactly how this should be done. And this will not work unless you take the time to truly step back and listen, acknowledge and be very vulnerable. I tell people very comfortably, I am not from healthcare and I'm here to learn from you. And there are things that I can add and bring to the table. And there are many things that I need to learn from you, and just bring people up in what they come and what they know. So being vulnerable, that acknowledge that I don't know, I would love to learn and would love to then question my successes and adapt them to maybe a very different approach. Because success, there's nothing that fails that can fail you as much as success can, right? It's so tempting to go and copy paste it, but it's also probably the biggest mistake we can make, especially when we step into a new space that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming into any new place when you're new, showing that willingness to listen and not coming in saying, this is how we did things, so we're gonna like copy and paste it here. That also I don't think wins you a lot of credibility or friends within the organization either, in that sort of approach. Yeah, did you have anything that you were able to identify that worked for you at Novellus that just wasn't going to be the same sort of plug and play fit at Emory?
Yes, so Novellus obviously is a technology company, manufacturing. So you work with engineers and they're very action biased. And so you need to just the pace of execution, the pace that people are ready to step into it and that expect you to push things with is very different in academic healthcare world. So that was a very quick learn of, like, even when you know the answer and you go and it's like, hey, here it is, let's go deploy this, knowing that it is much more complex system, a much more inclusive system. You know, people probably value less knowing the answer and giving the answer and let's go do this. They would value more, I had an input, somebody came and asked me about my physician group that's not the same as this other hospital, or, you know, there's a lot of uniqueness even in the hospitals we have across town. So I have learned very quickly that yes, there's urgency and you have to make changes, especially stepping into in the midst of a pure crisis of staffing and workforce. People didn't necessarily have the time to take the pace that they're used to. At the same time, they still were looking to be included and to be asked and to be invited for the input. So it's a very complex system, and working through that very differently has been the key for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Hirsch put in the chat, you know, very insightful. All of your experiences are resonating as I've been driving transformation as technology leader in IT and product organizations. So glad to hear that's resonating. And so, you know, you joined Emory Healthcare in 2021 at the peak of the pandemic as the VP of Talent, Learning, and Culture. So first of all, just so we understand what you do, you know, what are your responsibilities in that role?
So it was kind of a newly shaped role because of how Emory Healthcare found, you know, the challenges to be all around people, you know, throughout the whole spectrum of their employee experience. So that's how the scope was also defined. The first lane in my scope is talent acquisition. We play in the same Atlanta talent market, so it didn't make sense for us to recruit for talent and to compete with each other amongst the hospitals. So we have a centralized talent acquisition function, and this is part of my scope of how we bring people in and how we make this easy and service all the hospitals and providers without having that unhealthy competition of who gets the nurse that you found for cardiology, for example, right? Of having a way to do that. And then the second lane in that is learning, and learning not only for leadership development, but also for individual contributors, their professional skills, and, you know, what are the things that we put out there for people to get better and to continue to grow. This is something we all expect, to be able to grow and learn as we join any organization. So this is my second lane. The third one is around employee experience, employee surveys, listening to the voice of employees. How do we shape that? That's the close partnership with our D&I officer as well. So as we drive inclusion and shape culture, you know, that work happens there. And then the fourth lane is talent management. We didn't even have that, so we're building it from the ground up. of setting up some of the processes around our competencies and succession planning and the things that we want to be proactive about, so that we can also be building the talent that Emory Healthcare needs for the future growth and what we need to achieve going forward.
Wow,
So these are
that's a
the
really,
4 lanes.
yeah,
It's the full cycle of employee experience.
I was going to say, I mean, that's a big scope, but one that's super important for the organization. You know, I'm curious, given that you came in during the pandemic, you know, what were your first 90 days like?
Well, I was told multiple times, and I had such an opportunity to meet so many of the executives. This was probably the most extensive interview process I have ever had in my life. I think by the time I got the offer, it's almost like my first month onboarding was complete, because I had met with about 45 leaders and executives. Oh, wow. I felt like I've met with everybody during the interview process. So this was very helpful, though. While I didn't quite appreciate as a candidate, I was like, well, and especially a passive candidate, I wasn't even sure that I'm looking for a change, and I love Novelis and the work we had done at Novelis, right? But then I really valued that in the first 90 days, because I stepped in already knowing where the pain points are. People had told me very clearly, even to make the decision, yes, I can come and help, knowing what I'm stepping into. And in that world, it was mainly talent acquisition. We were losing, especially clinical talent, to a lot of the contractor opportunities in the market that kind of disrupted the whole industry. And it was hard to compete with that. It was hard to compete to $180 hourly rate that a nurse is living for. There is no way, right, that you can offset that. So this kind of recruitment talent acquisition space, I can honestly say, took a huge focus, and I knew it would as we were stepping into this. So elevating the team, reorganizing them, and really setting them up for success to be able to compete with a lot what's happening in the market for talent acquisition. So this definitely defined my initial 3 months with them. And I was very eager to show small wins along the way, but that would give some hope. And at Emory Healthcare, this is even our purpose, improving lives and providing hope. And that in a way became my small mission of how can I improve your daily life when you're short-staffed at such an extreme level, and then provide hope so you can see we're doing things and we're making strides that will get us to a better place in the near future. So that was certainly, you have to jump, and this is not the time to have a conversation around, oh, I can't believe you have no talent management processes, or right, you'll lose credibility upon arrival, or it's not even the time to talk about, oh, let me tell you the opportunities that culture can bring. You have to dive in deep and truly address the burning platform, and which was that for us. We were able to stabilize. We now are able to have a strategy. We're elevating our TA function. Far from a victory, right? This is going to be a long journey in healthcare, but at least we're in a good place to be stable and to have a good rhythm of bringing talent to Emory Healthcare that we need.
Yeah, I mean, talent acquisition is something that I think I hear from a lot of clients across industries has really been an issue and a challenge right now. Are there any specific things that you're focusing on in that area that might be helpful for people who are having similar struggles?
Oh gosh, so many things, but we had to learn quickly how to leverage media, social media very differently. So recruitment marketing is at a different scale right now. And if you're not doing that, the geofencing and, targeting the things that put Emory as an employment opportunity in front of where people go. And it could be any social channel that they go. So at this point, it's almost like a ticket to the game. We probably were able to get away without being very sophisticated with social media and targeting our market and where nurses are and what kind of websites do they go to. And this is no longer the case. So being creative around that, another creative solution that has really worked for us. We were also hearing the frustration on the candidate side. I apply to all these jobs and nobody ever calls me. And I was like, yeah, the recruiters have 4,500 openings and hundreds of people apply to them every day. I'm sure we're missing talent, right? Because it's just our technology is not there yet to AI screen maybe some of those. So what worked out for us is to kind of remove that and accelerate the process. We started going with hiring events so that somebody can just come in like in the good old days and say, hey, but we're kind of targeted of this is where we would be. We advertise on the right channels. Come hear about all of the hiring opportunities we have. Come talk to us. Our team is there. Our hiring managers are there. We got expedited to be able to give offers on the spot. Come here, talk to us, and walk away with an offer. So we were giving them gifts and trying to really build the excitement across town and give people opportunities now that COVID slightly, backed off and allowed us to be in person again, to be there and to be there, to be visible, to allow people to come in and actually connect. Everybody's looking for a connection, and while technology got so sophisticated, we found this to be super successful. Some days we would have 60 offers from a hiring event at the end of the day. This is amazing, right? And we're able to kind of find these shortcuts that is back to my statement of giving my leaders hope that we are making things we've never done before. We are creative and we're creating these opportunities for them to come and interview on site and for candidates to come and see us and feel us. And I'm able to, as they wait, of course I would go and I talk to them about Emory Healthcare, and I do talent and learning and where would you like to grow going forward. So that personal touch goes a long way in the connection.
No, I love that. I think, we've gotten so high tech almost, and it sounds like, you've been focusing on the high tech, but sometimes the low tech, but high touch is really beneficial. And I can imagine if you're getting 60 people signed up on a given day, I mean, that would give me a sense of hope as a leader that things were moving along. So it's really helpful. Yeah. And so, we talked about the culture at Novellus. How would you describe the culture at Emory Healthcare? And particularly, you have, I was going to say, like, you have 11 different hospitals, the clinic, the 250 provider locations. So, how would you describe it and how do you shape it in so many different locations?
So the one thing, this is a great question. I've reflected on that as well a lot, because we are kind of ready to, maybe let me just step back for a minute. Culture exists whether you actively manage that or not. It's there. So it is a matter of fact, as leaders, do we want to be proactive and take an advantage of what Steve Fisher does at Novellus, of actually shaping it in a very, very purposeful, very targeted way. And then you really know you're getting the results you want. At Emory Healthcare, we've been probably more into where the organic shape and form has taken place of culture. And this is, and it's beautiful. It was actually a nice surprise. And maybe it is healthcare, right? People probably sign up to work at healthcare because they want to help others. They don't necessarily go to make the most income they've ever earned in their life, or to have the highest career level that they can earn in a nonprofit, but they truly want to help people. And you hear that across everybody you spoke to. I'm helping patients. I'm helping somebody, save their life or their loved one. And there's a lot of care that almost probably attracts that talent. So I have to say, Patricia, that's kind of the gift maybe of healthcare, that you didn't even have to shape proactively or to sit in a room and say, let's care for people and let's want to help. Like, they almost come and sign up to do this work, maybe even chose to go to school to be a nurse because they already have that as a driver in them. So I have to say that's the easy part. Like, everywhere you go, you see people who are there to help others and they really care to be kind. So I kind of describe the culture as very kind, very inclusive. And I felt that even during the interview process, like, you want 45 people to interview me throughout multiple sessions. It's like, But now I understand why, because they truly have that genuine, organic sense of, we want to include everybody, we want to invite all the voices, we want you to be part of that decision. And it does come from this place of care, where we are probably falling a little bit short, or there is an opportunity now to do more of that consistency across our system. Is what are these things that are holding us back? And probably that's the one thing that correlates to what was happening at Novellus as well. We still have a lot of silos. We still have a lot of my hospital versus your hospital, and do I look better than this other hospital? And rather than, hey, we're here for the bigger good of all the patients, of all the Amory brand. So being able to reach to a point in which we have started these conversations now of what are the things that we can add on and build on to this beautiful, welcoming, healing, caring place that people are already identifying with, that actually can also help us move faster in a faster pace, or being more efficient, or being more optimized in the resources we don't waste if we just stay in our silos. So this is the journey ahead for us, and I'm very excited about it. But I'm also very encouraged with what I have stepped into as organically already there. That would be a big enabler to build from.
Yeah, I mean, well, given your experience and what you've told us thus far, I mean, I'm confident that you're the right person and definitely up to that challenge. They're really lucky to have you. I'm also curious, about the hospital operations, because so much of that is done through teams. And so what kind of learning or development strategies have you put in place to really be able to help these teams to be able to perform at their full potential?
Yeah. So the one big shift, Patricia, that we are looking to introduce to our teams is the opportunity to learn in a very agile micro-learning format, because not only they need it, and it's all depending on everybody else's, right, being on the same page, but then we're very short-staffed. I don't have the luxury to pull people into a training. They're helping patients, and we're not at the ratio of staffing we will be, and we probably won't be for the near future either. So the big shift in strategy and how we're addressing that is now we're putting a lot of things from our learning management system to be accessible through your phone. Maybe you can listen to something for 5 minutes in your drive to work. That kind of micro experience and micro learning is truly what people can afford to do. Because the other answer would be, we just have no time for any of it. And we're not, we will deprioritize training and developing our people, which kind of gets us back into the same predicament of then people are leaving. They don't want to be there. Even if I'm short-staffed and if I'm stretched, I still want to learn, and I still want to feel I'm moving forward. So we're shifting a lot to micro learnings, micro sessions, moving trainings that used to be a whole day to a couple of hours, 90 minutes. In the morning, in the afternoon. Last night, we had a year-end review session at 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. So people who are maybe stepping into a night shift can hop on. So we're trying to bring flexibility and agility to how they can access content without committing a lot of time, which we know we are not going to have the luxury to do.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it makes me think that that's how people are consuming, like it's equivalent to an Instagram reel or
Yes.
TikTok, maybe a little bit longer, but kind of what people are used to doing to learn. Is that something that is voluntary, or do they have to go through certain modules, or how does that aspect of it work?
So there is a part of healthcare, I didn't know that, right, that's very regulated and very required. And this was something I stepped into again last year when I joined. These regulatory requirements, this is mandatory. No matter who you are, you have to complete. Like if you're in a hospital, you step a foot in a hospital, you have to have completed these, I think it was 12 topics. And the way we had done them in this like fairly stale technology, it was taking people 20 to 22 hours to complete. Imagine being short-staffed in the middle of the pandemic, and you have to pull a nurse from the floor to go take this for 22 hours, and you have no choice. It's a regulatory compliance. It has to be done. So that was probably my most meaningful and first kind of a project to tackle, to say, there's got to be a better way. We're not the only hospital in the country that needs to do that. And I'm sure people are not spending 20 hours to go through this. So we found a way, for example, to now pre-test everybody's knowledge in a very contemporary technology that is now still required, right? But if I'm a nurse and I've been doing this for 20 years, now I can complete my regulatories in 30 minutes because there were probably only a couple of topics. And now I can also do it on my phone. We made it available on the phone. And if you're Polina that comes from manufacturing world and you've never done any of these, then the most investment of my time would be about 2.5 hours if I have to take them all, because we shifted all these topics into what was industry standard, micro learning, interactive, take it on your phone, on your iPad, as you wait in line somewhere, right? And people are able now we calculate the like hundreds of thousands of hours we actually saved just this year by these regulatory requirements. And then the other stuff is more of a gift. It's available for people to self-enroll, as well as we have some requirements from onboarding standpoint, but even those we've made them very brief. As for example, leadership orientation is 3 hours. It's required. We want you to take it, but we're not going to keep you all day. And we've really taken the ownership of selectively knowing what to put in there and what to remove.
Wow. I'm sure you're very popular as a result of that change. I think you freed up a lot of time for people.
Yes, a lot of hope as well, because there's also that narrative of like, we don't change quickly, we kind of do things the way we've always done them. And just them seeing that happening also gives hope, and maybe hopefully gives people the permission to question things that don't seem to make sense and can be done better and faster.
Yeah. So what excites you most about, the world of talent, learning, and culture for the next fiscal year?
I would say this exact opportunity, Patricia, of seeing so many places and so many opportunities that, we've been disrupted. And healthcare has been one of the few industries that probably hasn't been disrupted. Back in 2008, when the banking industry got disrupted, healthcare kind of remained fairly the same and stable, right? And kind of over many more cycles when different pockets of industries were disrupted. We weren't. And all of a sudden, this is something we've never seen before. People who have spent their whole career in healthcare, they've never seen anything like the disruption that healthcare is going through right now. So maybe I'm just that crazy person, but that excites me. Every time I see like an opportunity to say, oh, we can do something different, or let's learn from this, or what can we improve and be more agile with this. It can be scary, but I also see a big opportunity to actually step into this challenge with a mindset of what can we do better, and how can we now build a talent lane, and let's take on the work on culture, which I'm so excited about. And I'm thrilled to hear our leadership team starting to talk about how do we build on the foundation of this kind and caring and inclusive environment, but then to the next level of being also intentional about some of these things that are holding us back. So this excites me most. Just the opportunity ahead to face that continued disruption and face it with innovative ways of not doing things the way we've always done them, and just being able to kind of shed some light on what that way ahead would look like.
And I would guess that, that you talked about hope several times. I would guess that being able to give people hope that, here's the path forward, and, because disruption, I would think it's scary, often for people, but being able to give them the assurance of the hope, and I've been there, done that, must be helpful for you.
Yes, that certainly is what excites me, Patricia. The opportunity to impact and to help. And I know if I help Emory Healthcare, I'm really helping our community, which was the big decision point for me to even make the change. As I heard about the challenges and kind of what the team is faced with, I was like, I think I can help. I truly believe that I've gained some skills and I've had some experiences that can be impactful, and I can help. So now it's almost like time to be able to do that. So that excites me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to open it up to questions now. And so Anne's going to facilitate us through that, but this has been a really great discussion. So
Thank you.
what the questions are.
Yeah, it really has. And the comments in the chat area are very specific about how useful the ideas that you've presented this morning. So thank you very much. So, and I just have to comment when you said that the impact that you can make and the scope of your responsibilities are now so much broader in terms of your community. Emory Healthcare is everywhere in the Atlanta community. And so it's true, you do have the opportunity to make a huge impact. All right, so Kathy Dowling has asked, and I think you've answered this somewhat, but perhaps you can talk more about it. How do you transition to another company like Emory that's so different from your previous company? And you talked about remaining open. What else did you personally do?
Personally, on a personal level, I wanted to be, because this is a big job responsibility. I have a team of probably 80 people through the levels of talent acquisition and learning and talent. This is a big investment for Emory Healthcare as well. So I wanted to step back and be very confident that I want to do this for the right reasons. Like I actually have the passion, and it's almost like connects with my own purpose of this is where I want to make an impact. And so I can then be committed and plow through even when I face the challenges and I hit the walls, and even when things I just speak about them so easily. Like, of course, it's a no-brainer. You used to spend 22 hours. Let me show you how you can do this regulatory training for all 25,000 employees in 2 hours. You would think it's a easy sell and it's like a no-brainer, but even that hasn't gone without challenges and hiccups and conversations and really, and have we thought about this and that, which having the resilience to almost like to go through this. The first thing on a personal level in that transition was also knowing I'm doing this for the right reasons and I'm having an impact, and I'm impacting all these nurses that are saving lives every day. And at the end of the day, I will work with my stakeholders, but I know that I would give something of value and improve, the heavy work of the frontline healthcare people that help us every day. So that was maybe and my personal thing of like, I want to do this for the right reason. This is why I want to have the impact. And maybe a lot of that was an appreciation from the pandemic itself, kind of being locked at home and, after having traveled the world and the fancy and the glory of, go to Singapore for a conference on talent and, go to Korea to run a culture session. These are shiny, beautiful experiences. And then you're home and you're closed and you're scared to go to the store, or you don't know how safe this might be for your kids or your loved ones. And my family is in Bulgaria. Will I see them again? Will this virus, do something that I'll never see them again? All of that gave me this defined purpose of I want to help the people who helped us come up with a vaccine, come up with treatment, with a solution. So now we can go back to the life we want and we love. And I felt compelled to contribute to that.
Yeah. So you had a Northern Star, sort of a vision of who you wanted to be as an HR professional, as a leader. That makes sense. And this wasn't your first time transitioning from one company to another. Did you find it to be easier knowing that you can transport your skills, your abilities from one place to the other, despite or regardless of the industry type or the sector?
Yeah. I never questioned that I can help as I was listening to even through the interviews of where the challenges are. And I knew that I can help, but I also knew very well it will not be Polina the way you've done it before. So you have to pause and learn and build some credibility as well. So it didn't scare me, the transition, but I knew I'm signing up for a pretty significant challenge. So I was very clear about that. There was no surprise there. Some things I was surprised that we didn't have or how we were doing them, like we've done them 20 years ago. I mean, some of these were small surprises, but I think having the clarity and still feeling confident that you're making the right decision is important, so that you can kind of stay the course and have your energy up and still be excited when you talk about it.
Wow, that's great. Well, Susan Hitchcock says, I must follow up on Polina's mention of How Women Rise book. She's asked you to share a few of the habits that you thought inhibit our success the most and our advancement, or what do you think are the most significant ones anyway?
Oh gosh, Susan, I will speak about myself personally, and honestly, as I said, many of those applied to me. But the very first one you'll see in the book is reluctance to claim your achievements. And that was something that I've always been super reluctant to do. Like I would go to the great work and I never wanted to to say, hey, look what I did, and just to feel, it felt like I'm taking credit, but I'm not doing that for the credit. So, but then this gives you the reframing, for example, this particular habit, that don't think about it this way. Think about it, here's what I learned and how I can share. So maybe this other team can also like think of this as giving a good way of something you've learned, not so much of patting yourself on the back that you have this great accomplishment, but bringing enough visibility to the impact and how this can translate into bigger good for other people. So that was, for example, one that I know was holding me back. Something I see with other women as well, and I do it myself. We tend to minimize ourselves. If we receive a compliment, great work, Polina, this was amazing, I'm so grateful for what you've done, we tend to very quickly almost like discount that statement. It's like, no, it wasn't that big of a deal, or oh, that dress looks great on you. And we're so quick, we almost feel compelled to, to discount that. And so that points it out as a habit. Don't do that. It's holding you back. Say thank you and train yourself to say thank you. So these are small things. They're not big shifts, I think, but it's such an insight into what, especially as women, what we tend to do, that kind of almost like we put ourselves in the back seat, even when it ends up taking away from what you can really give to others even more. So I know I can carry on more, but you guys have to look at them, because I promise you, whether you're a man or a woman, you will identify with many of these, and will give you an insight to do it differently.
And Patricia, I know you coach quite a few women and women executives. Do you find that you need to coach around this particular issue, minimizing? And
yeah, I think that comes up a lot, and or I think in a similar vein, like being appropriately assertive in sharing your ideas and selling them and believing in them, even despite there being pushback. So I think like being able to lean into that as well. And I haven't read the book, but I'm going to as a result.
Yes,
I don't know if
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I have a feeling the orders just went up significantly.
I think so too.
Well, another question from Susan is that we hear that nurses in particular are burned out. And so how is Emory addressing that?
Oh, wow. I wish we have the answer. So let's share with everybody, right? It is a real challenge, and it's not an easy fix. One of the things that we were intentional about at Emory Healthcare at the beginning of the year, I think is back in January, we stood up the first and probably one of the largest in scope wellness, Office of Wellness in the country. And we have chief wellness officers. We co-share the position with medical and non-medical expert leaders. And so what we're trying to be now very intentional about is not just talk about resilience. And some of the things I love when they talk about this from our wellness office is you can't yoga your way through burnout. You can't just sign people for another yoga webinar and give them the wellness app, which we do, like we have those things. But it's not effective, it's not enough. So what we are now trying to tap into is invite people to discover and to be more mindful of these things for themselves and what their needs are. Have a conversation. In my leadership programs, I'm bringing an element of that well-being for every leadership program, even early on, to even just checking on somebody to say, how is your day going? I made you a cup of tea. That can go a long way for a nurse, because she just felt cared for and seen and acknowledged. And these small things can be more effective than sending them, right, a lot of these wellness tools and materials that they, guess what, don't have time for either. They don't have the time for that, and they don't want to hear it about it anymore. And even the word resilience now has gotten such a negative. Our people don't want to hear resilience anymore, because they feel like it kind of invites them to be even more, just be even stronger. It's almost like you're not enough. And that's quite the opposite of the experience we want to create. So we don't have the answer yet, but we are doing some things very intentionally. We show up with our wellness officers on site. We invite people to think about these practices that work for them. We try to make it one size fits one, and not to feel like we're going to bring these programs and webinars and you sign up for yoga and here's the answer. Because for me, it may be bake a dozen cookies from my boys could be my answer today. As long as you can define it, that's what gave you the break. And another thing we were intentional about is a nighttime shift. We would fire somebody for sleeping. If they were caught napping, you get fired no matter what. So that's hard not that we want to encourage people sleeping on the job, but there's the power of power naps. So the Office of Wellbeing helped educate around that. And so we can create space for a quick power nap when someone else is, for example, taking the floor. So this way people don't feel scared and they'll lose their job if they fell asleep as they're doing the night shift. Those small things go a long way when people see that you care and you want to help them out.
Mm-hmm. It almost reminds me of the old concept around an emotional bank account and trying to make deposits into that bank account, but just feeling cared for has got to go a long way. All right, so a question from Hirsch is, she's our IT transformation leader who is going through a cultural transformation. And her question is, have you come across the challenge where the top leader talked of changing the culture and you were chartered to do that, but he or she did not demonstrate the right behaviors himself or herself?
Wow. Yes, I have seen it. And my advice would be, do not plow through that journey before you have had a chance to have that really candid conversation. What I have also found with senior leaders, a lot of times they're blindsided. They don't know that that's how their behavior came across as incongruent with what they said. So you may end up actually earning a lot of trust and credibility if you're the brave soul that from a place of care that has that candid conversation to say, you know what, I'm your partner with this. It's very important for me that we're successful and I can help you with the culture journey. And in that vein, I do have to share with you something that that didn't come across the way we intended, and kind of bring some light and some coaching to that behavior. It is a scary thing, but if you're prepared and you do it, it goes such a long way, because I promise you, even the trust relationship would go up, and we fear that they would, now we're not going to be the person they come to, or something bad would happen. And at the end of the day, they're people too. They have demands and they're blindsided most of the time. So they would take it as, I'm so glad. I hope they will take it this way, because even executive has even taken on the culture as a thing to do. They care enough to care for this, right? So my guess is that they would welcome the feedback, but I would stop additional pacing down the journey and the action items and the additional whatever is on the roadmap until you have that insightful conversation with the executive. And maybe that may even come as an agreement to keep me honest. Please come and give me that feedback. And how do we spread that to the rest of the leadership team? Because otherwise all efforts would fail, and this will not be a good experience for anyone.
Yes, great advice. All right, so a question from Linda Ross. What are the key aspects of your leadership development program?
So we're kind of starting to build that here at Amory Healthcare in a programmatic way. But as we're stepping into the first tier, because every tier of talent would require some different aspects, just we need to be very clear about that. If you're developing frontline leaders that have been peers until yesterday, this is one element of things that they would need compared to mid-level and executive. So where we're starting at Amory is at that frontline leadership level to be more programmatic about it. We have been traditionally more ad hoc, like a menu style, to just sign up for conflict resolution, and you sign up and you go. But it hasn't been like a cohesive programmatic experience. So we're launching that now for the first time. And I think the elements that are very important to me would be, and we're intentional about, right, would be the typical skills, which I think are the easy ones. How do you delegate? How do you manage your time? And how do you become the role model and have a difficult conversation? These are they would last the test of time. They would never go away when you manage people for the first time. The new elements I'm intentional about is the things around vulnerability. How do you manage change by being vulnerable? And that's not what Amory has been teaching leaders to do. Like, we've been kind of in more of that old school of like, you know the answers and you show up and you tell them the answers. And if you don't know the answers, then you just don't say anything. But that's such a bad approach. Show up and say, you know what, I don't know the answer. We're learning this and we're uncovering this. So the new elements I'm really intentional about are these. How do we give people the permission to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know the answer, to connect in a different way, and to connect beyond just the work and the task. People want to know that you care about their child or their mother they're taking care of, or whatever else is happening in their world. So building these authentic connections is an element in the program we haven't had before. And we're also now bringing in some inclusive leadership that probably hasn't been an intentional focus in earlier versions, probably, of capability building. But maybe those are the new things that I feel as leaders and people who may shape these programs, we owe others the opportunity to reflect on and to learn about.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fantastic. It sounds like a building block approach then, but I love the idea of giving them the basics that transcend every leadership level. All right, so Teresa Willis has asked around defining the culture beliefs for an organization. At Novellus, were the culture beliefs integrated within the organizational core values, or were the culture beliefs and the core values made to be one in the same?
Oh, such an excellent question. I was actually personally confused, and I had a conflict with that when we started talking about the cultural beliefs and defining them. It's like, well, what about the values, or wouldn't people be confused? And so what I very quickly learned is that culture is about movement, right? And every point of time you are on the journey, that movement may look different. So thinking of the cultural beliefs is just like that. So today, those are not the values, they're very different. So the values might be, we value integrity. Great, nobody would question that. We value honesty. We value caring for each other. Those are the values that are probably longer lasting. They don't change every few years. When you talk about culture and moving culture, you don't anchor on those as much, but you look in the mirror and you say, you know what are we doing today that doesn't translate into even living up to these values? Oh, we kind of think of each other first, then we think of the better good. We don't win together, for example. That's holding us back, or we don't share information. I see many people holding things close to their chest because they feel like that makes them more indispensable, right? So these are the kind of dysfunctional behaviors. And so you want to shape these cultural beliefs around the things you want to change, the things you want to become better at. It's almost like, think about it as that constructive feedback that you're now going to live up to. Mm-hmm. So I don't win together, but I'm going to say, listen, I'm going to win together, and I'm going to recognize people who win together, and I'm going to recruit for people who win together with my questions. And so hopefully 5 years down the road, we look in the mirror again and we say, well, guess what? This is part of our fabric right now. Nobody even thinks of their silo anymore. We're already winning together. It is time for that cultural belief to be dropped off the list. And you look at the list and say, well, what is it that we don't do now? Well, guess what? We kind of interrupt each other, and we probably are not as open to other ideas. Great. That's your new cultural belief. I'm open. And then you start hiring for that and kind of guiding the organization through that. So that's what defines that journey that never ends, but very different from values, because the values you don't change every day. Right. Culture is a movement, and you need to really know what is holding you back, and that's part of your movement. And there is a milestone, and you reevaluate, and maybe new things come on the list, and some things that you've accomplished, you drop off that list. So that's how you never really arrive, but you become better as you go.
Polina, I would read your book if you read it.
I should write it, right?
I think that's so.
You have become an amazing expert on culture. And so speaking of that, and this will have to be our last question, but what techniques have you utilized to build consensus for change at the executive leadership level?
Well, where we find ourselves now, and even at Novellus, where we were kind of drowning in really red numbers that nobody was happy with. Usually, I think people recognize that change probably needs to happen. We need to change at least the results we're getting. The approach I take because people start getting defensive more when you question the way they do things. Then it's personal. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like I'm perfect. I have this figured out. I'm the expert. Do not come and question this, right? But yes, we do need to have different outcomes. They all agree on. So my advice for that would be, don't convince people to change what they do and what they own and kind of what they would, they would be protective of. Go after the things that everybody agrees on. So, hey, we all agree that we cannot have the financial performance we have today, right? We all agree on that. So building from the things we all agree on, it's like, let's now think through what it would take for us to get to this different outcome. And it's almost like, instead of telling me, well, Polina, now you have to change the way you spend money on leadership development programs, because I don't think you should be spending $1 million anymore, right? We want different financial outcomes. If you tell me that, I'm like, no, wait a minute. Are you undermining the importance of leadership? That's never going to go anywhere to influence the change. But if you agree that we need to have a different financial outcome, and what are some ways that we can reach that, almost like invite people to shape that change with you, so they can feel like they own, and you didn't just tell them, to change their way. It's almost like help them self-explore, to say, what can I do to help with that, and then invite them to that. It would be something that I've seen work much better with executives, to say, you know what, maybe we ought to change the way we handle this and that, or even productivity, or the way we think about other things. And also being the role model. If I'm the one to talk to them about that, it really helps if I've already stepped in and cut my own budget on spending that I do. So being able to have the credibility of leading by that example, like in my world, I just changed some really significant roles and I repurposed them, and it's something that's never been done. But now it's easier for me to go and say, hey, let's look at that. Is that the right makeup of the team we need and the skills we need? And then I've done it. Like, I've done the difficult part as well. I've done the changes. So now you almost like have earned the right to invite others on that journey with you.
That's right. So coming from a place of real credibility. Well, thank you, Polina, for this amazing hour and a half. All right, Patricia, I'm going to turn it over to you for our one last question.
Okay. So Polina, what is one thing that you would like our group to take away from today's conversation?
Maybe the one thing would be, in whatever walks of life we walk and the role that we do, find the thing that excites you most about that and reconnect with what makes that work meaningful. And I know that would give us the energy of all of us to just overcome, to have difficult conversations, to kind of stay the course and inspire others along the way, as it will always feel worthwhile and meaningful. So that can be probably the gift we can all give ourselves of, following that passion and the purpose, and reminding ourselves of why we're doing the things we're doing. So I would love to leave everybody with that advice and wish everyone a wonderful Thanksgiving next week as well. And many, many things for us to be thankful for.
I agree with that. And thank you so much for your one thing, but also just for this discussion. It's been so valuable. I feel like I've learned and would, could happily be here talking with you for another hour. But thank you so much for what you shared. Just one more thing for people who are listening in. Our next meeting for Women in Leadership is going to be in person. And as Tino has put, it's not too late to sign up, and tables are available for 2023. So make sure to contact us for that. And I want to echo what Polina said about Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. If you're not on our mailing list for TurkNet, I encourage you to do so. We recently had information about gratitude and the power of bringing that into your organization. So I think that's something for us all to be thinking about over this upcoming holiday season. So thanks again, Polina. Thanks again, everyone. And we will see you next month for the Women in Leadership series.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.